Thank you, Father Joe. And with the parable of the snow white socks, we now move on to topical questions. Question number 1, Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and a happy New Year to you and all colleagues. And I wish to ask the Scottish Government how it will respond to recent flooding in Dumfriesshire and across the country. Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you and Happy New Year, Presiding Officer and Dr Murray and colleagues. I visited White Sands in Dumfries last week to see first-hand the effects of the flooding event at its peak, when White Sands, Friars Venel and a number of other side streets were badly flooded. And on Friday, I visited Govan Communications Centre to see the resilience response operations covering local authorities in the West RRP area. And I very much sympathise with the member whose office was damaged and others who were affected in the area. I would wish to reiterate my gratitude to local authorities and emergency services who reacted swiftly to minimise the impact of rising water levels and establish welfare centres for those affected. In events of this nature, which sadly impact on Dumfries on a regular basis, preparation is key, and I was extremely impressed by how well prepared all the authorities were, aided by the timely and accurate flood forecasts from the Scottish Flood Forecasting Service, run by SEPA and the Met Office. Flood risk management is a priority for the Scottish Government. We have maintained and protected funding for SEPA and, in partnership with COSLA, have maintained the levels of funding identified for flood protection in the local authority settlement at £42 million per annum. The Cabinet Secretary for Finance has also announced on 31st of December that the Bellwyn scheme is open for applications for financial support. Next week, as planned, prior to the recent weather, I will host a summit with local authorities to look at the work currently underway to produce the first ever round of flood risk management plans. These will make a significant contribution to our collective work in Scotland to reduce flood risk and will help target future investment. And I know from my conversation with local responders in Dumfries that these maps will add value to their work.
Elaine Murray.
I thank the Minister for his response. The Minister will be aware that Dumfries is the largest town in Scotland which suffers from regular flooding but has no flood prevention scheme in place. Now, Dumfries and Galloway Council is, at long last, considering the details of a flood prevention scheme for the White Sands area and is likely to require an estimated £9 million in additional funding for its implementation. Can the Minister advise whether any central funding will be available and when that might be?
Minister.
I thank the member for her question. I mean, I certainly raised this issue was raised when I met with the leader of the council and the chief executive at White Sands. I'm aware that the council is in preparation of its flood protection scheme for the White Sands area, and it's looking to perhaps not eliminate all flood risk, but to try and reduce to a reasonable level the level of flood risk that might affect the town centre and how important that is for the regeneration of Dumfries itself. I certainly acknowledge the fact it is a very major population centre and currently doesn't have protection of the type that the member describes. As the member may be aware, COSLA and the Scottish Government have an agreement to distribute the £42 million per year in terms of funding that's distributed to the capital grant to local authorities. And there is an application open for funding which closes on the 21st of January. And I know a number of local authorities, I'm not sure at what stage Dumfries and Galloway Council will be at that point, but a number of local authorities are planning to bid for that funding. So there is a pot of money that's available. It's allocated jointly between local government and Scottish Government. And that is the funding which local authorities like Dumfries and Galloway will need to apply for.
The Minister for that information. The Minister referred to the flooding in my own office, but at least I had several hours to prepare my constituency office for the flooding on the 30th of December, courtesy of the SEPA flood warning system, which covers Dumfries town. However, constituents in other parts of my constituency, such as the 21 households flooded in Kirkconnell, were not so lucky as their areas are not covered by the warning scheme. Given the increased incidence of flooding events in Scotland, will the Scottish Government consider funding SEPA to extend its full flood warning scheme?
Minister.
Certainly acknowledge the importance of flood warning schemes, and indeed the experience in White Sands was that the authority was able to get in place the response in time, and that demonstrates the value of such investment. We have had a steady programme of extending the range of parts of the country that are covered. We most recently launched the scheme in the Carron at Stonehaven, which covers that town, which has also suffered a number of flooding events, as I'm sure the member is aware. And in my discussions with the leader and the chief executive of Dumfries and Galloway Council, I've asked them to come to me with their suggestions as to where they think a flood warning enhancement in Dumfries and Galloway would have most impact, and I look forward to receiving information from them. It is, in some cases, very challenging to put in place a flood warning scheme, in a particular catchment, but we'll look to see what we can do to help the local authority and others across Scotland.
Aileen McLeod.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I also start by wishing you and all my colleagues a very happy New Year. Now, I thank the Minister for his efforts over the festive period across the country and for visiting the White Sands in Dumfries in particular. But Dumfries and Galloway Council's strategic flood risk assessment ranked Newton Stewart and Minigaff highly in terms of flood risk on all factors. So will the Minister give consideration to these areas and any other high-risk areas in the region being designated SEPA target areas for specific early flood warnings?
Minister.
Indeed, I certainly recognise that there were areas like Newton Stewart that were very badly affected in previous flooding incidents. Thankfully, this time round, we knew of the circumstances which had affected Newton Stewart previously, and that helped inform the actions of responders. But still, we did lack a warning system for the Cree, and that does affect a number of communities along the River Cree. So SEPA have published their flood warning strategy to 2016, and I'm pleased to say that does set out a programme of work to enhance their network across Scotland. It does include a coastal flood warning scheme for the Solway Firth. That's planned for 2015, and I'm certainly happy to ask SEPA, as I say, to consider what more could be done across Scotland, and certainly recognise the member's direction to look at the River Cree and the importance of providing as much information as we can to residents of Newton Stewart and other communities in that area. I would certainly suggest that anybody who is affected by flooding in a region like in Newton Stewart at the moment can benefit from signing up to Floodline. At least they will then get a flood alert to alert them to the fact that there is a general risk for the local authority area. But we are obviously trying to do as much as we can to enhance the network of warning systems to give as detailed and as timely information to residents in Dumfries and Galloway and other regions as possible.
Question number 2, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Perhaps I should declare an interest as Chair of the Cross-Party Group on Animal Welfare to ask the Scottish Government, in light of the recent discovery of 6 badger carcasses near Peebles, whether it is content with Police Scotland's resource allocation for detecting and preventing wildlife crimes.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
Well, obviously, the allocation of police resources in line with national and local priorities is a matter for Police Scotland. However, Police Scotland has demonstrated its commitment to tackling wildlife crime at a national level. Wildlife crime coordination sits within the Specialist Crime Division of Police Scotland. There's a national portfolio lead at superintendent level, supported by a lead senior officer and a wildlife crime liaison officer in each of the 14 divisions, and a network of wildlife crime officers who operate across the country. This approach ensures better coordination, greater consistency, improved communication with partner agencies to tackle wildlife crime and to make links between wildlife crime and other serious and organised crime across Scotland. In addition, the Scottish Government provides dedicated funding for the National Wildlife Crime Unit based in Livingston. The Wildlife Crime Unit operates with partners across the UK to assist in the prevention and detection of crime by obtaining and disseminating intelligence, as well as supporting law enforcement with specialist advice.
Christine Graham.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response, and I'm sure he shares the shock and disgust for myself and my constituents at this horrendous discovery on their doorstep. Notwithstanding the additional resources to Police Scotland are allocating, recent evidence shows that badger baiting is on the increase. 40 incidents in 2013, and indeed in 2012, only 2 prosecutions. One was a fine and one was then ongoing prosecution. When badgers are slowly savaged to death, the dogs themselves sustain horrific injuries. Given those injuries and given the partnership that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned, can I ask if he is aware of any liaison between Police Scotland and the veterinary community to assist, if these dogs are taken to them, in tracing these criminals?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I can say is that detecting and prosecuting wildlife crime is always very difficult. The crimes usually take place in remote parts of the country where there are few, if any, witnesses. Crimes may not be discovered until days or often weeks after they've taken place, and the evidence is usually exposed to the elements and deteriorating fast, but it's not to say that prosecutions are impossible. Badger baiting, for example, has seen a number of successful prosecutions in recent years. For the 5-year period 07-08 to 11-12, there were 15 badger offences under the Protection of Badgers Act 1992 proceeded against, with 13 guilty outcomes. And the Scottish Government's annual report on wildlife crime, published in September, contains details of other court proceedings. There is a desire and an intention to ensure that these criminals are brought to account. As announced by my colleague, the Minister of Environment, in July last year, the police are looking to bring in all the modern investigative techniques at their disposal to bear on this type of crime. It is a matter of partnership, working with those who operate in the rural areas, making sure also that there is a recognition that this is not simply a rural crime, that it ties into criminals and serious crime gangs who operate out of urban areas, which is why it's important to realise that this is not simply for police officers who operate in rural Scotland, but for all police officers wherever they operate, and clearly partnering and working with other agencies, whether SSPCA or others, is important, and that is the intention that my Cabinet colleagues and myself are intent on maintaining.
Ms Graham.
Yes, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I fully accept that these are serious and organised gangs involved in this, but returning the difficulty in tracking them, I understand that there's now the breeding of bull lurchers, which are big, muscular, powerful dogs to make the baiting even more savage. Can I ask if there's any resources, you may not know, but Police Scotland may be able to tell us in due course whether there's a whistleblowing capacity within the Scottish Wildlife Crime Unit so that people can report sightings of this new breed of dogs specifically being bred for that purpose?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm not aware of the specifics, but I'm happy to inquire and come back to the member on that. I think what we can say from the specialist unit is it's about maintaining and providing the sharing of information across the police and the constabulary, so that it's not simply officers in some of the rural areas who would be viewed as taking this as important and taking it seriously, but all officers in all 14 divisions, making sure that information is disseminated downwards. Doubtless that is the reason, and indeed it's necessary given I think the comments made by Ms Graham. The likelihood is that these dogs will be kept in areas not necessarily the areas in which they are being used, and accordingly I am no doubt there will be a capacity, whether through Crime Stoppers or others, to ensure that that information is not only able to be received, but it will be acted upon when it is received. But I will be glad to get back to the member with additional information.
Claire Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and again, as other members have said, Happy New Year to everyone in the Chamber. I also declare an interest to work with Christine Graham as Deputy Convener of the Cross-Party Group for Animal Welfare. And I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary, who's already referred in his previous answer to modern techniques, can explain what arrangements are in place to monitor the use of the internet by groups who are involved in wildlife crimes such as badger baiting, and for instance those who set up a Facebook page devoted to fox baiting, as well as groups organising dog fighting. And as the Cabinet Secretary has already acknowledged, this can be an urban crime as well as a rural one. Thank you.
Well, I think these are challenges that the police face across the whole spectrum, whether it's in terms of fraud that frequently moves or other elements of criminality, whether it's in relation to offensive behaviour relating to football with the use of social media. I think what the member can rest assured at is that the police do monitor social media to ensure that they keep abreast of what is happening, to make sure that actions that are unacceptable, that are criminal, are dealt with. I have no doubt that Police Scotland would be happy to brief the member or indeed the committee if she wished further, but I think she can rest assured that social media and the use of the internet is used and monitored by the police, because it is essential to be able to deal with criminality in the modern age in which we now live.
Nigel Dawn.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will sadly be very well aware of the recent incidents of the poisoning of a golden eagle in the Angus Glens in my constituency. I'm wondering whether he can give me an update on whether the introduction of vicarious liability, whereby managers and owners of estates become responsible for the criminal actions of their employees, has made any difference to incidents of poisoning within the rural community police.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, obviously the poisoning of the young golden eagle was a disgraceful and barbaric act, especially at the end of the Year of Natural Scotland, which has seen the golden eagle voted as Scotland's favourite of the big five species. I think I have to be constrained about what I say about the incident, as there is a live and ongoing police investigation. I think members would expect no less, especially given the comments recently made. What I can say is that we've seen some real progress in reducing the number of poisoning of raptors down to 3 in 2012. However, it does appear that 2013 saw an increase in confirmed poisoning. The final numbers are yet to be confirmed due to ongoing police investigations. There were also a number of illegal shooting and trapping incidents involving raptors, and I think this reinforces the need for measures that were announced by my colleague, the Minister for Environment, in July, which include reviewing the penalties for wildlife crime, looking at ways to restrict the use of general licences in areas where there are good reasons to believe that wildlife crime is taking place, and most importantly, to support the Lord Advocate's encouragement to the police to use absolutely all the investigative tools at their disposal to identify and bring to book the criminals behind these attacks in Scotland's precious wildlife, whether it comes from those who should know better in a rural environment, whether it comes from serious organised crime gangs. It is entirely unacceptable, and the full weight of the law and law enforcement will be brought to bear. On the specific aspects relating to vicarious liability, I think that would be for others perhaps to comment on once matters are seen to develop over recent years. But progress has been made, but we do require to be ever vigilant, because this offence reinforces that it is still ongoing and the consequences can be tragic.
Thank you. That ends topical questions. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 8706.